Welcome to While You Can, Adventures in Life and Legacy Planning.
Hello and welcome back to While You Can, Adventures in Life and Legacy Planning with Amy Reagan. Amy is a Florida estate and succession planning attorney who helps professionals, property owners, and business leaders create meaningful plans for life's biggest moments. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're diving into marriage and parenthood, from diamonds to deeds to diapers. Amy will share how new couples and new parents can protect what matters most, avoid costly mistakes, and set the stage for a secure future. Amy, welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be here. And we can leave off, divorce is another D word that goes, not always. So we'll keep it upbeat.
That is true. I mean, it does flow that way for some, but yes. All right. Well, we'll focus on these three for today. Obviously, marriage and parenthood, some of life's biggest milestones. Why do you think that so many couples forget to update their legal plans when everything else in their lives is changing in such big ways?
I think it's exactly that, probably, that everything else is going on. So you're juggling oftentimes jobs, a new house, a spouse, a new baby. Everything can be just overwhelming in and of itself. And sometimes we have a tendency to procrastinate on things that are not staring us straight in the face.
No, we don't.
Yeah, it happens. And there's no shame. It's really just, once you realize, okay, yeah, I really do need a plan for myself, my loved ones, my property, that you actually do make a plan and reach out to someone to get qualified help when doing so.
So let's start at the front end of this. What's one of the first things newlyweds should update in their estate plan or their financial documents?
Yeah, well, I think newlyweds, they're acquiring assets. So maybe you think before that you didn't really have anything to put into a will. A will is a really good starting point. It's one of those foundational documents that we recommend. Even if you go with a trust-based plan then or in the future, you still want to have a will, because what if you die with something that isn't otherwise designated to transfer to your spouse, either automatically at your passing or through a trust? So I would say a will. You can also indicate in your will who you would want to be the guardian of your minor children. So that's an important part of a will. You can also designate who is going to not just receive your property, but who's going to shepherd that process? Who's going to take that will to the court and file it and hire an attorney and make sure the process goes smoothly? You want to put some thought into that. And then if having court involved is just not what you want, then think about the ways to avoid that. And there are ways to avoid it, even with a will-based plan, but it takes some very proactive and careful planning. Another easier way is to have a revocable living trust, but you still have to do the proactive work up front to make sure that it functions the way you want it to. And then some other very common documents are healthcare surrogate designations, preneed guardian designations for you, your spouse, your children, and then powers of attorney. You want to be able to empower someone to be able to get access to your documents if you were to become incapacitated. So that's very different from a will. So powers of attorney are in effect while you're alive, and then a will kicks in after you've passed.
And obviously, real estate, one of the first big purchases that a couple makes as a general rule. How do you feel like they should think about titling property? And if it's not titled properly, what do you see go wrong?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So sometimes parents will help their adult children who are newlyweds acquire a home. Sometimes either the new homeowners, the newlyweds, want their parents to be on the deed with them or vice versa. And I would caution, you proceed with caution is really what I would say when adding someone who doesn't live in the home and isn't going to be responsible for what goes on in the home. being on that deed because it can lead to liability. The other important part, especially here in Florida, is that we have very strong homestead protections, and that protects that homestead where you reside. And you want to make sure it's titled in a way that allows that. So if you read something on the internet or see a TikTok or some other social media post that says, oh, all real estate needs to go in an LLC. Well, guess what? In Florida, that can be risky business. You don't want to jeopardize your ability to have homestead protections and homestead tax discounts and property tax discounts in Florida. So I would say talk it over with a professional who knows what the ramifications are of different titling. Another really strong asset protection or just titling for real estate with spouses is tenancy by the entireties. And this is not just real estate, this can be other assets as well. And what that means is that the asset that you're designating as tenancy by the entireties, assuming all the requirements are met, and one of them is acquiring it while you're married. And when you acquire that property together and you designate it tenancy by the entireties, that means that both spouses own it 100%. So if one spouse goes over and does something that creates a liability, unless that other spouse signed on to a joint liability or it's some sort of security interest in the property like a mortgage, anything else, that person that is the creditor is not going to be able to touch that asset because it's only a creditor of one spouse and not both. So that can be very strong protection as well. Lots of things to think about, of course. Revocable living trusts and having a homestead deeded into trust can be effective as well, but it should be done by an attorney who understands how to use the proper language so you maintain your homestead.
Another thing that I'd like to bring up that I think can get could get overlooked fast is our beneficiary designations on things like retirement accounts or life insurance policies. Do you see that as something that
Yes.
people miss a lot?
Yes, and sometimes these designations need to be updated. Even if
Right.
you had it in the first place, 5 years can go by and you could have a change of heart or glitches can happen. I have seen it myself. I've had beneficiary designations done when I set up an account. And then when I went to update them 5 years later, it showed none. So I would say this is something you got to be extra careful with and make sure that you're checking it, I don't know, once a year or every other year, making sure those designations are there and that they reflect what your wishes are.
We've talked in the past about things like guardianship and whatnot. For couples with young children, the idea of guardianship can be a tough topic. I mean, you talked in our last episode about like it implies that something has happened to you, which is not exactly a fun thing to think about. How do you help guide parents through the process of naming someone to care for their kids if the worst happens?
Yeah. So you want to think about if it's going to be somebody who is going to be able to take on that responsibility and not just go in hierarchy of age. Okay. So that can be a lot of default mindset where, oh, well, if something were to happen to me, then I automatically go to parents and then oldest sibling and so on. And that may be the proper protocol for you, but it's not, you shouldn't just think default oldest to youngest. You should think about who's actually going to have the wherewithal, the energy to keep up with, especially if something were to happen while your kids are young. Do you want it to be an aging parent, or would it be better to be a sibling or even a cousin or a very close and trusted friend who knows all the activities that your children are keeping up with, as well as knowing how your parenting style is?
hmm Yeah, that's an important one too. Parenting style. How would you like your child to be raised? That's definitely something that you need to consider. Another thing is that couples will use are prenuptial agreements and postnuptial agreements. Obviously, there's always a stigma about these. That there's lots of stuff movies and TV jokes and whatnot. So, they're kind of dicey sometimes to talk about. But can you discuss how these marital agreements and estate planning intersect?
Absolutely. So I would say that this is another area where we proceed with caution because I don't want to overstep my lane into family law. And likewise, a family law attorney doesn't want to necessarily overstep into estate planning. So it's one of those areas where I think it makes sense to have obviously, you want both spouses to have the opportunity to have separate representation. That's really important. I think any family law lawyer would agree. But aside from that, it's really about what are we doing here and how does that impact estate planning as well as how does that impact that protected homestead property? And in Florida, it's Florida law is very protective of spouses. They do not want you devising, which means giving away your property upon your death to someone other than your spouse or your minor children without that spouse's consent. And then for minor children, there's even some more protections there as well. So this is something that you want to think through. What happens if you do divorce? What's going to happen to that property? And then your minor children, what's going to happen there? And it's something that you can also work together with your estate planning attorney because it's not just about divorce. It's what happens if I want to give my homestead. Let's say that my spouse is independently wealthy or doesn't care for the house, and they're totally fine with me leaving it to a parent, a sibling, a niece or nephew. If we have no minor children, I should be able to do that, but I need to have that sign off by the spouse in order to do that. So
Mhm.
that is one way that estate planning can overlap with those pre and postnuptial agreements.
How often do you see sort of the ramifications of what can happen when planning is delayed until it's too late?
Yes. So the podcast is called While You Can.
Hmm.
It's really important. I literally was sitting across the table from someone within the past week who is in good shape, has a young family, bikes 5 times a week, has their specific route that they bike. They do not remember going over the handlebars and breaking multiple bones, ribs, and just generally being disoriented. And one thing that they told me is that during their recovery, they had multiple surgeries this year. I hadn't seen them in 6 months, so a lot had happened. And they said they had the peace of mind of knowing that they had their plan in place, they had their short and long-term disability plans and long-term care plans in place. And that's a perfect example of where I focus on advanced planning in the estate planning and medical directive space. And then somebody on the insurance side can come up with policies that can add to that peace of mind that know, okay, if I'm injured, I'm having surgery, do I have adequate insurance to make sure that this doesn't put a financial strain on my family when I'm coping with a very physical recovery? So that's one way I've seen it play out. Another way, and that one's a good story. So they did have planning in place. But what if somebody doesn't? This is really sad. It really is because if somebody doesn't have capacity to sign the documents that would give their loved ones the ability to take action for them when they need it most, you're talking about getting a court involved. And that's not fun for anyone.
Hmm.
That can look like a a sheriff's deputy serving your loved one who's dealing with incapacity with a petition to determine incapacity. They're going to perceive it potentially as their family suing them. And then they're going to be examined by 3 people, the incapacity panel that the court appoints, likely 3 people they've never met before. So very traumatizing for the person who's incapacitated. And then likewise, just a complete strain on relationships within that family because people can have differing opinions. Oh no, mom's fine. And then another family member could say, oh no, mom is not fine. She used to spend $400 a month on her credit card. Now she's spending $40,000 a month running up bills in debt. She's not okay. She's had a stroke. She needs intervention. And so this can be pitting family members against each other. And the very person who they're trying to help in their own different ways is the person that should be able to make that decision. Well, who would they have wanted to take over and not be in the middle of a petition for incapacity?
Yeah, I think we talked about that in the last episode. Just the idea that you're doing this for other people. You know, your planning is good. It's good for you, but it really is more about making sure that, you know, taking decisions out of people's hands. You know, those tough decisions about someone's, you know, situation, if they're on life support, what have you, and you know, like that. That's the real, you know, area that we want to focus on is, hey, you're doing this so that you can not have any question marks if something bad happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How can parents, you know, you mentioned you mentioned insurance before, but how can parents use things like life insurance to protect their kids and avoid court battles or even trusts as well?
Sure. So life insurance is one of those things that you don't have to have that complete chunk of money today.
Right.
You can invest in it over time. And there's so many different flavors of insurance, and I am not an insurance salesperson, so I don't pretend to know all the different options. But for example, there's term and whole life, and term can be less expensive than whole life. There's even some hybrid products out there. So what can insurance do? You know that if something were to happen to you and your kids are young, they're dependent on you, and they're going to be dependent on you for that long, trajectory, that runway as they're ramping up in life. And if you don't have, having kids and raising them is expensive. If you don't have that big chunk of money that's going to sustain them that runway, life insurance is a good way to bridge that gap. And then and trusts are another way to help in that process as well. So if maybe you did have a number of assets and you put that in trust and you pass away before your kids are adults, you can designate in that trust what happens if your kids are still minors when you pass away and what happens to those trust assets, who's going to be the trustee for them, who's going to monitor and make sure that their needs and their educational goals and their healthcare needs are being met during that process as they grow up. And it really helps minimize the need for court involvement if it's done properly.
If for any newlyweds that might be listening to this and thinking, okay, all right, so what should I do first? Where should I start? What should I make sure that I have? You know, we want to have kids, we want to buy a house, all that stuff. What's a good place for them to kind of hit the ground running?
I would have them talk to an estate planning attorney, and when they're preparing for that process, really just taking stock of, okay, what is it that I have? What is in my world that I am interested in protecting? What is in my world that I'm concerned or scared about? And what are my long-term, more lofty goals? If things do go right, what is that picture going to look like? Bring all of that information to your estate planning attorney, and they can help you sort through what are the most important documents for you right now, and then what might you want to build in later on.
Great advice as always, Amy. Thank you very much. All right, well, that's it for today's episode of While You Can, Adventures in Life and Legacy Planning. If you're newly married or you recently became a parent or just realized your someday plan needs to be today, visit aereagan.com to schedule a consultation with Amy. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave us a review, share this episode with someone starting their own family journey. Amy, great to see you as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.